at Loma Linda University Hospital in California. So I wanted to just right away turn the mic or slide over to him because we have a lot of questions and topics we asked him to cover in California. So I wanted.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jolin. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much to the entire MAPA community. I cannot thank you enough for this opportunity and this honor and privilege to be able to speak and to advocate on behalf of our Palestinian brothers and sisters across the globe. So the title of our talk today is Babies, Children, and Healthcare Workers, the Impact of the Occupation and the Assault on Gaza. So just as a quick reference point here, this woman right here is Dr. Asma Taha. She's one of my colleagues here at Loma Linda University Children's Hospital. And this is a picture of us at the Emirati.
We're not seeing any pictures.
We're not seeing your slides.
Oh, okay. Let's get started. Yeah, 1 second. There you go.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it. So this right here is Dr. Asma Taha. She's one of my colleagues. She's a neurosurgical nurse practitioner here at Loma Linda University Children's Hospital. And she went with me to Gaza. And this picture is from the Emirati Children's Hospital in Rafah during our trip last year in February. So start off with some disclaimers and conflicts of interest. So I had an opportunity to go on a 2-week medical mission to Gaza, Palestine last February of 2024. Unfortunately, it's reprehensible that we're living in a world in which simply advocating for basic children's rights is controversial. And to some, it's a form of anti-Semitism. However, I personally refuse to conform to such nonsense, and I proudly disclose with full sincerity and solidarity that I strive to protect basic human rights, which include the right to life, freedom, shelter, nutrition, health, education, and most importantly, dignity. Over the next 30 minutes or so, I hope to double click on the following topics. We'll discuss my experiences in the largest functioning neonatal ICU at the time in Rafah. We'll go over the topic of abduction and torture of healthcare staff. We'll also go over the abhorrent acts of taking children as hostages. And then finally, if we have some time, briefly, we'll delineate some violations of the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. So Gaza has been described as a graveyard for thousands of children and a living hell for everyone else. These mothers there, they face unimaginable consequences. They face unimaginable consequences, and the children there are just defying all the different odds of surviving. There's a complete lack of resources following October 7th. There's a restriction of humanitarian aid. It is as dire as the social media platforms are displaying. The hospital in this video has now been besieged and then now currently active again. This is the European Gaza Hospital in Khan Yunis. And this video right here was taken exactly 1 year ago during the holy month of Ramadan, in which Muslims are fasting and also fasting during the day and praying at night, which you can see these gentlemen doing here on the left. And what I wanted to highlight in this video is that this is in the middle of the night, and you can see that as these healthcare providers are going down the stairs, those are families that are living on those stairs. There is, people come to the hospital, again, an entire family here living on the stairs of a hospital. People come to the hospital thinking that it's a safe haven. This is a safe place. This is where we go for nutrition. This is where we go for healthcare, for education, and for safety. But unfortunately, they've been taken, family members that are in the hospital are just trying to survive. And even then, they're taken sometimes as hostage and intentionally targeted. One thing that we did notice in the hospitals are sometimes some of these what we called unexpected volunteers. So here's a short video of one. This is Zakaria, and he's one of the unexpected volunteers at Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in central Gaza in Deir al-Balah. Zakaria's school was bombed, and he, like his peers, had a desire to help out his besieged community. He's 11 years old. As Zakaria wants to become a paramedic when he grows up, but who's to say that he hasn't already grown up? Who can guarantee that he will? Zakaria has seen more dead children in a month than probably my entire children's hospital staff combined. The innocence of childhood has been stripped from Palestinians, all and including all Palestinian children. A shortage of staff, equipment, and medications, compounded with a high incidence of premature births, resulted in countless otherwise preventable deaths. The hospital that I worked at, the Emirati Children's Hospital, was the largest functioning neonatal ICU in all of Gaza, and it's located in Rafah, which is the southernmost portion of Gaza. For those who don't know what a neonatal ICU is, this is an intensive care unit that takes care of preterm babies, so children that are born sooner than they should have, or those children that are born at term but are unable to survive on their own, whether it be the fact that they need to control their own temperatures, they're unable to control their own temperatures, they're fighting off an infection, they're trying to keep their glucose levels normal, or a myriad of other problems as well. Now, the actual hospital itself, or the neonatal ICU, had 12 to 14 beds, but we would oftentimes see 35 to 45 patients, which meant that many of the patients would share the same small isolette in the neonatal bed that I'll show you in the next couple of slides here. And you can see here in this picture of me, I'm placing in a breathing tube on this patient here on the front of the screen. And you can see two children here. One child is, in the foreground, or I should say in the background, is notably nice and bright and pink, whereas the child in the foreground is dusky, gray, and blue, indicating that this child, this newborn baby, this child right here is minutes old. I would say hardly less than 5 minutes old. And this child is absolutely suffering and is requiring medical intervention. Unfortunately, that child did not survive. Now, isolettes, as we mentioned, are limited or were quite limited, and many of them were broken. Now, this isolette right here that you can see in this picture, this is to house one child. And the doors, which are these big oval openings, they should have a door to close it. It's as if, without having that door closed, these children are not able to maintain temperatures on their own. It's as if you were on a winter storm front inside of your house and you left the front door open. How warm do you expect your house to be if it's extremely cold outside? And that's the case with these children. And here in the stateside, or actually across the globe, and even in Gaza prior to October 7th, you would never group children together. And the reason for that is that these newborn babies have little to no immune system. So if one of them has an infection, they are guaranteed to transfer it to the other. And the reason why we have these children grouped in this particular isolette is because we didn't have space to put them anywhere else. So we tried and we opted to, try to, manage our resources accordingly. And we opted to group patients together based on the infection that we thought they had. Mind you, more than half the time, we could not even test to see if they had an infection. We didn't have the lab supplies. We didn't have the physical supplies, nor did we get the lab results back in time. The already precarious situation of infant and maternal mortality was worsened as the healthcare system completely collapsed. Here you can appreciate damaged equipment, often the only functional equipment available in hospitals. Infants were kept on ventilators or those breathing machines without pulse oximetry, blood gas analysis, or cardiovascular monitoring. And again, you can see here that this half bed is held together by plastic. Now, what do we think that the sanitary conditions are of this neonatal ICU? There were constantly people coming in and out of the hospital or in and out of this neonatal ICU without scrubbing in or a way that we sterilize ourselves before seeing these newborn babies. But unfortunately, due to lack of supplies, we didn't have an opportunity to do so. This image right here on the left is an archaic X-ray machine. It's portable, and this right here is the actual machine that goes underneath the patient and actually shoots the image. Now, all of our X-ray machines here in the US, even at the most poorest or most limited resource institutions, will have a monitor attached to it as well, so that you can see the after the image is taken, just like a camera, you can then see it. But unfortunately, this X-ray machine, which was partially functioning, and again, you can see it's kind of held together here by duct tape and mask tape. You would shoot the image and you would get the result back 2 or 3 days later. And you couldn't get an X-ray on every single patient every single day. This machine would be shared with another hospital and other units of the hospital as well. And it was constantly out of service. This room here on the right, unfortunately, it brings PTSD back for me, and I was only there for 2 weeks. This is the resuscitation room. And in this room, I saw many, many, countless children perish and die. And I witnessed so many family members say goodbye to their children. You know, the birth of a child is a joyous occasion, and anywhere in the world it is. But in Gaza, it's one of the most terrifying experiences. As you can imagine, these mothers who are dodging bullets and drones and bombing, they're living in tents, trying to provide for their families. The husbands, the fathers, everyone has lost their job. There's not a single job left in Gaza right now. How are these men supposed to provide for their families? What are they to do? So to see those intricate conversations during a time of what was otherwise a joyous occasion, and now be conflicted with watching their child die, was absolutely devastating. Now, intensified blockade of humanitarian aid and fuel, coupled with excessive destruction of water purification and desalination facilities, plus cross-contamination from sanitation spillover, has really left the Gazans in anguish. As we know, polio has reemerged in Palestine after many, many years, all due to the sanitary or lack of sanitary conditions. With great regret, I came to find out that my colleagues were forced to procure formula with seawater, as potable water reserves had run dry by the end of October last year. Now, I acknowledge that not everyone here is in healthcare, but the sodium content in seawater versus the sodium content in regular drinking water is astronomically different. If you make formula out of seawater, you're actively going to be poisoning your patient to death. Their sodium levels are going to be too high. They're going to develop swelling and edema around their brains, and they're going to die. And it was heartbreaking. And I will not forget the guilt that was expressed by my Gazan neonatal colleagues. The guilt that was expressed in their voices as they communicated that they never went into medicine thinking that one day they would be forced to actively poison their patients. I mean, no physician goes into medicine thinking that one day you will be the cause of that child's death. So either this child dies from hunger pains and starvation and dehydration, or they die with their belly full, but unfortunately with electrolyte aberrations leading to a swift death. This horrifying scene was just another working day in the hospital for healthcare staff all across Gaza. Healthcare workers were forced to operate in unimaginable conditions where their safety and the safety of the patients they took care for were constantly at risk. Now, I would speak to healthcare providers and even the ambulance drivers that took us to and back and from the hospital for the 2 weeks we were there. The day we left at around 6 or 7 a.m. And 2 hours later, the ambulance driver and four of our neonatal ICU nurses were killed because the hospital that we were in for 2 weeks was bombed, literally just 1 or 2 hours after we left. Now, for healthcare providers and staff, death is increasingly inescapable. Dr. Ahmed Mughrabi was forced to leave Nasser Hospital in the middle of the night with his family, and he described being chased by Israeli military dogs as they evacuated. He detailed how the military abducted his head nurse, demanding that he take off his clothes. And Gazan Medic Voices is an organization set up by international medics to provide firsthand accounts from Gaza, and they shared the following testimonies. A nurse stated that they tied our hands behind our backs on our knees, our heads on the ground for 13 hours without food, water, or the bathroom. I had lived 3 days of hell along with my patients, said one surgeon. What happened to doctors, patients, and internally displaced people here is unbelievable, even in your worst nightmares. The use of violence and degraded treatment against doctors and paramedics are recurring themes in the testimonies that we collected. Dr. Rebecca Inglis is an intensive care doctor and a co-founder of Gaza Medic Voices, and she says that the attacks on the healthcare workers are systematic. She said that detainees are denied any family contact, medical care, or legal counsel. There's a complete lack of transparency about their whereabouts, and it's a flagrant violation of international humanitarian law. Now, the Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza has been bombed, besieged, and now flattened to rubble and ashes. When it did exist, it was effectively the only children's hospital, and it only had one pediatrician, the gentleman that you see in this figure here. The pediatrician, his name is Dr. Hassan Abu Safia. He was also happened to be the hospital's director. The hospital was first raided in December of 2023 and again in October of 2024. Dr. Safia, along with his colleagues, were first detained and interrogated by the Israeli Defense Force for refusing to evacuate when he was mandated to do so. When he was released back to the hospital to continue caring for his patients, he learned that his 15-year-old son, Ibrahim, was killed by an Israeli drone. Ibrahim was seeking shelter in the hospital as his father cared for the community. And Dr. Safia was again detained and he actively remains in an Israeli prison without charge for the past 80 days. Here's a video of him from about 4 weeks ago.
Sufyan, how are you? You're doctor.
This is the physician. This is the pediatrician and the hospital director. This is the head of a hospital that you see shackled and held hostage without any appropriate accusation held against him. He's held against his will, and for the last 80 days, he has been held there. Where is the outrage for him? What if this was my hospital director? What if it was his child that was murdered? Would we empathize the flagrant murder of his son as opposed to Dr. Hassan al-Mustafia's? It's very challenging and very disturbing to see that someone of such caliber, this hero to the community that is refusing to leave the hospital, his hospital, to take care of this beleaguered community of his, is now being held hostage and potentially even tortured as well. Here we can visualize the haunting story of Dr. Mahmoud Abu Najalia. He left the world the pictured message to ponder 1 month before being murdered at Al-Awda Hospital in November of 2023. Whoever stays until the end, we will tell the story. We did what we could. Remember us. It's absolutely harrowing to read these words. Now, these are countless stories from countless Gazan healthcare providers, which I can personally vouch for. And the director of Al-Shifa Hospital and fellow pediatrician, Dr. Muhammad Abu Salmiya, alleged that the medical staff at Israel's military-run detention centers are participating in beatings and are denying essential medical care to detainees, leading to amputations and deaths. This is published in the British Medical Journal, which is a very large international medical journal based out of the UK. This was published in 2014. 10 years earlier, in 2014, Israeli doctors were accused of complicity in torture, and the Israeli Medical Association failed to either respond or to fully investigate the charges. Again, this is in 2014. 5 years earlier, in 2011, a report by two human rights organizations, the first called Physicians for Human Rights Israel, and the second called the Public Committee Against Torture in Israel, found that doctors were involved in torture and in violation of their ethical and moral obligations. The report was based on more than 100 cases of ill treatment of Palestinian detainees since 2007. Again, none of this started after October 7th. There are well-documented case reports dating back to as early as 1996, verified by independent sources, all with the same similar findings. The Israeli doctors are complicit in torturing healthcare providers and staff and civilians in Palestine, in Gaza. To be clear, there is no context where bombing hospitals full of sick and injured patients and the medical staff that's caring for them is considered to be acceptable. Along the same lines, there's no circumstance in which healthcare providers should be assassinated, taken hostage, injured, or restricted from helping the ill. You cannot justify the restriction of aid from entering into Palestine. Furthermore, healthcare providers complicit in the torture of detainees, hostages, or any other living being are to be prosecuted and charged accordingly. Along the same vein, in a sickening turn of events, let's proceed forward with reviewing yet another violation of the Geneva Conventions, which is taking children as hostages. Now, no child or family should ever have to experience the horrors of being held hostage. As depicted in this video, these Israeli civilians were held captive for a period of 7 weeks and were successfully released during a ceasefire deal between Hamas and Israel. The damaging effect of isolation on children is unequivocal. Solitary confinement on children has serious risk of long-term developmental impairment and psychological harm. This child right here is Abigail Eden. She's an adorable 3-year-old American-Israeli girl who is now orphaned. Her parents were killed in their house in a communal kibbutz, Kfar Aza, after October 7th. She ran to a neighbor's home for shelter, only to later be taken hostage along with her neighbors. She was amongst those released during the humanitarian pause after being held hostage for 50 days in Gaza. Now, when we talk about hostage exchange, the release of Israeli hostages held in Gaza was in exchange for Palestinians held in hostage in Israeli prisons, some over 10 years. This table right here depicts the number of Palestinian children held in Israeli prisons and detention centers at the end of each month for the past 15 years, many without trial or representation. Each year, approximately 500 to 700 Palestinian children, some as young as 12 years old, are detained and prosecuted in the Israeli military court system. The most common charge is stone throwing. An estimated 10,000 Palestinian children have been held in military detention over the past 20 years. Israel is the only country in the world that automatically and systematically prosecutes children in military as opposed to civilian courts. And prison is a particularly barbaric approach when applied to children and adolescents, given the disproportionate long-term consequences, often for the rest of their lives. In 2015, Human Rights Watch found that Israeli military courts in the West Bank denied bail to Palestinian children in 72% of cases, while several courts denied bail to Israelis in just 18% of cases. The discrepancies and disparities in the legal system for those who occupy versus those that are occupied are shameful. Here are some findings from the organization Save the Children. They found that during arrest, 42% of children were injured, 65% were arrested during the night, and half of all arrests took place in the child's home. 86% report being beaten, 70% threatened with harm, and 60% were hit with sticks or guns. 69% report being hit or touched in the genitals, and they report being strip searched. 60% experienced solitary confinement, 70% suffered from hunger, and 68% said that they didn't receive any health care. Finally, 58% of children were denied visits or communication with family while being detained. This video right here is from the West Bank in December of 2023. Now, there's a plethora of evidence reporting that children under 14 years of age are not mature enough to be considered criminally responsible. Children of this age do not have the ability to advocate for themselves within the criminal justice system, which is systematically biased on how it deals with its youngest offenders. Again, this is outside of Gaza. You can see here a teenager being handled roughly outside of the Holy Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem in June of 2024. Children's cognitive and emotional development in captivity is impaired, rendering them particularly vulnerable. The psychological aspects of being held hostage are as horrific as they are irreversible. Captivity is extremely traumatic, culminating in post-traumatic reactions and other psychological disorders, including suicidal behavior. Since we have just a little bit of time left, I'll just go over some violations of the Geneva Conventions, which are a series of international treaties that are established to rule, or which are established rules for the humane treatment of people during armed conflict. They are a core part of international humanitarian law, which regulates armed conflict and aims to limit its effects. The conventions protect people who are not fighting, such as civilians, aid workers, and medical personnel. Now, this list of Geneva Convention violations is nowhere near exhaustive, as we are limited by time constraints, but it does clearly illustrate the blatant disregard to international humanitarian law. Let's take a quick moment to skim some of the highlights here. Article number 20 shall be protected against any attack on their honor, against rape, or any form of indecent assault. Article number 49, individual or mass forcible transfers, deportations from the occupied territory is prohibited. Article 53, destruction of the occupying power of property is prohibited. Article 55, the occupying power has duty of ensuring and providing food and medical supplies of the population. Article 56, the occupying power has the duty of ensuring and maintaining medical and hospital establishments, public health and hygiene. There should be adoption of preventative measures to combat the spread of infectious diseases. Medical personnel of all categories should be allowed to carry out their duties. Article 72, accused persons have the right to present evidence necessary to their defense. Article 76, persons accused of offenses shall enjoy the conditions of food hygiene, which should be sufficient to keep them in good health. They shall receive medical attention, spiritual assistance, special treatment for minors. The irony is that these violations are documented and posted publicly onto social media platforms by the most moral military in the world, in a sickening display of sanctimonious hypocrisy. Here's some quotes by the IDF. Nothing happens by accident. When a 3-year-old girl was killed in a home in Gaza, it's because someone in the army decided that it wasn't a big deal for her to be killed. We are not Hamas. These are not random rockets. Everything is intentional. We know exactly how much damage there is in every home. Now, the information presented thus far truly does not even scratch the surface, as this has been going on for the last 16 months and 75 years. However, it does serve as evidence to confirm the implementation of collective punishment as touted by settlers, military officials, and politicians. Let it be known that we vehemently oppose the imposition of collective punishment and prioritize upholding the sanctity of life and the innocence of childhood. Finally, for those that refuse to acknowledge what is happening before our very eyes, here it is spelled out clearly for all to read. Here's what you get when you bomb civilians and erase or steal Palestinian heritage or culture, restrict, refuse, and destroy humanitarian aid, flatten homes, raise streets, and inflict terror by a brutal occupation, target shelters and other recognized safe havens, restrict clean water, the fundamental source of life to humans, animals, and plants, intentionally destroy energy plants and limit power to people being occupied, pulverize refugee camps with 2,000-pound bombs, leaving behind craters in the earth imprinted with the US stars and stripes, and finally desecrate healthcare and educational facilities. These actions all conform with the recognized stages on the pathway to genocide. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Unfortunately, 1 in 6 children across the globe is exposed to war, which, as you can imagine, has far-reaching consequences. To provide some context, the other pediatric healthcare providers here, as pediatric healthcare providers, we have a collective commitment to ensuring that all children are afforded an opportunity to attain their full potential for health and well-being. As healthcare providers, it's our role to actively stand in solidarity with Gaza's physicians and healthcare workers who, despite the horror of their situation, refuse to abandon their fundamental oath to save lives where there is hope of doing so. I've listed here some action items, which I'm sure many of you are actively involved with, which include calling Congress, going out there on the street and protesting, not just to the general public, but also within your workplaces, within your homes as well. The BDS movement of boycott, divestment, and sanctions, as we don't want to fund an ongoing genocide. For those that are in academia, writing manuscripts, writing journals, writing blogs, again, raising awareness on social media, and also fundraising efforts as well. Lastly, I often get asked, what are some humanitarian aid organizations? There are many. These are just those humanitarian aid organizations that I personally witnessed with my own eyes during my time in Gaza, and I saw these individuals providing aid to the civilians there that needed it most. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. I could certainly acknowledge that that's a lot to take in, and I apologize as I oftentimes try to speed through it just so that honestly, I've given this presentation several times and I tend to cry through it, so I try to kind of rush through as I don't want to relive through the trauma again. But I'm happy to repeat anything or clarify and answer any questions or hear comments from participants here.
Thank you, Dr. Ali. We're all shaken by what you have shared with us. I heard you say that you saw a picture. I'm sure you've shown this many times. And that picture gave you PTSD of all the children that were lost from this earth in that room. I want to ask a question before we go on with the program. Are there organizations or groups helping doctors who have gone to Gaza and seen what they've seen be able to deal with their PTSD?
Not that I'm aware of. To immediately answer your question, the short answer is not that I'm aware of. But I also think that there's another component to it as well. Yes, certainly physicians and healthcare providers like myself, sometimes we see images or videos, or sometimes we'll see a patient here in the US and we'll get flashbacks of what happened and what we witnessed. But ultimately, I think it's very, very easy to shift the focus of attention on us, when rather, I think right now, I think all attention needs to be placed on Gaza, on Palestine, on Sudan, on Ukraine, and the list goes on and on. I think that, certainly it would be great to be able to have a little bit of that support And in many ways, that, me personally, I have a very strong family support system. I have a very strong religious support system. But rather than focusing on what we saw and what we witnessed, what about those people that are living it?
Mhm.
What about those people that can't turn it off? I'm here in my beautiful Southern California home. It's like 65 degrees outside. There are palm trees waving, and I'm here talking about it. And if I choose to watch it again on social media, well, with just a simple flick of my thumb, I can move on to the next story, or I
Mm.
can quickly close the application. Whereas, if I get tired or emotional seeing it, how do they feel being a part of it?
Well, please consider us part of your support system because you have shared with us so much of what you have done and what you have seen there and your thoughts and wisdom on that.
Thank
Um,
you.
we are going to open up the chat for questions. And while we do that, I would like to bring up, or Cole, could you bring up the petition to Dr. Ann Klebansky? And this will be our action for tonight. We've had this before on another one of our medical webinars. And Dr. Ali, this is an appeal to Dr. Ann Klebansky. She's the president and CEO of Mass General Brigham, very large health system. And I don't know how your hospital has sort of spoken or not spoken about the genocide, but there has been a shockingly silent sort of response by the very large and sort of impactful healthcare systems in Boston and Massachusetts. So we are asking really, to stop being complicit in this genocide. So you can read it here, and then those of you who are on the call can sign the petition. I'm not sure, or, or we can check if you've signed before or later. So just go ahead and sign it, and we'll make sure not to send in double signatures.
Thank you
So
so much for this. Thank you so much for this action item. I will also echo that here on the West Coast, the silence from the healthcare community, from our medical associations, from our personal hospitals, that silence is deafening. It
deafening.
is. It is absolutely deafening. Only drowned out by the sounds of drones and bombing and bullets.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So if we want to move on now to question and answer, I'm sure there are a lot of questions. And Cole, if you could spotlight Abby, myself, and Dr. Ali. And Abby, if you could take the first question while I sort of look through them, that would be great.
Yes, so folks, as you think about what question you would like to ask Dr. Ali and put it in chat, and we will pose the question to him. Dr. Ali, I'm speechless. Your presentation took my breath away, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And it's remarkable that you are bearing witness in this way. And especially because it may be triggering for you, triggering your memories and your PTSD. So we're very appreciative to you for doing
Thank you.
that. Why aren't more, despite all of the evidence that's been shared, we've all seen the video footage, why aren't more countries around the world helping the Palestinians? I don't know if you have the answer to that, but
Yeah, it's certainly multifaceted. Unfortunately, as much as we try to avoid politics within healthcare, there's no denying that politics are playing a major role here. You have countries and or institutions that have long-standing histories of standing on the right side of history and being the voice for the voiceless and defending those that need the help. And some of those same institutions or some of those same countries are completely silent or advocating for further damage and for further carnage. And there's no doubt about it that unfortunately, the powers that be, primarily the United States, but also other Western nations, and including the settler state of Israel as well, they have a separate agenda. And I think they're able to kind of push that agenda forward by dehumanizing Palestinians. If it's very easy, I heard a metaphor once recently, and I apologize as I can't quote exactly who it was. Um, I think it was Dr. Bassem Youssef, if I can recall correctly, but he mentioned that, if in your house you see 10 rats, it's very easy to call an exterminator and have the exterminator kill all the rats because you think to yourself, this is an animal that's causing trouble or harm to us. But if it was, for example, 10 refugees that came into our house or 10 of our own children that were causing trouble, we would never use language like that, right? So by media vilification and the media kind of promoting and ministers and statesmen and political figures promoting and stating that Palestinians don't deserve, to live, it's very easy to promote their extermination. And specifically, when you have an individual like President Trump, who intends most recently to use a Palestinian as a derogatory term, to call someone, who was previously, he says, this individual was previously a Jewish person, but now he's a Palestinian based on just their stance and their rights and on their stance on the matter, and using it as a slur, as a derogatory term, is irreprehensible. So I think that by pushing this agenda that the Palestinians truly don't deserve life, dignity, um, is a means by which the world is able to witness this genocide unfold.
Thank you. Julie, do you want to take one then?
Yeah, there's a question here about, in Massachusetts, we should be able to raise substantial funds for medical aid. But the question is how pressing or not pressing, how is fundraising a priority in this time? Is medical equipment even getting through?
Okay, very good question. I think certainly fundraising is extremely important. Yes, there's no doubt about it that there are significant and substantial periods of time in which humanitarian aid is stuck at the border, at the border of Palestine, at the border crossings of Gaza, and oftentimes will sometimes even spoil as it sits out there for weeks and months. I personally witnessed thousands of trucks sitting outside, at the crossing. And this is a year ago. So yes, there's no doubt about it that there are many of those supplies that go bad, or those supplies are actively destroyed. We have seen many, unfortunately, Israeli settlers, including children, come by and destroy that aid that's meant to go in to help the civilian population. So I still think there is a role for it because during those periods of time in which the borders are open, in which Israel does somehow through pressure from the communities at large, from the world, from the United Nations, and so on and so forth. Once those borders are open, that's not the time that we want to raise funds for humanitarian aid. We want the aid to be ready and available to go in. So I would say there certainly is a role for that. But also, we need to expand our fundraising efforts as well. For example, here in the US and in Massachusetts, for example, or I should say in New York, where Columbia is, I just recently came across an article, I think earlier today, that was stating that as as the Israeli lobby is pulling out $400 million in grants from Colombia based on their protests, there are other entities that are willing to step up and provide those funds. So maybe this is a means by which we can advocate for Palestinian rights and dignity. Sure, there's the immediate needs of healthcare needs and nutritious needs that are needed for the people in Gaza, but ultimately we know that this precarious situation is not going to end in Gaza. It's not going to be due to, one military fighting another military or one military fighting, the civilians and exterminating them. That's not how this conflict is going to, resolve. This genocide is going to end. Rather, it's going to end in our education centers, within the meeting rooms of Congress, within the US. And if we can fund the appropriate people to get their foot in the door, Palestinians will no longer be on the menu, but rather they'll be sitting there at the table to advocate for them. The mere fact that you see me, I'm a US Pakistani citizen. I'm sitting here telling you about Palestinian rights. Why is it that there are so few Palestinians being able to advocate for themselves? Right? Because we have completely silenced their voices. They've become so, they've been shackled, unfortunately, and they're unable to advocate for their own sovereignty.
Thank you for that answer. Abby, before you ask another question, I just wanted, on follow-up there, you had put a slide that showed where you recommended, people,
The
fund
Organizations?
organizations.
donate to. So I'm wondering maybe if you could send that to me and then just, that slide, and then we can distribute it to the people who are here today, because, there are so many people who are wanting to help.
Absolutely, more than happy to do so. I'm happy
Thank
to
you.
share those organizations that I can personally vet for that are providing aid.
Thank you.
Just as an addendum to what you were saying, Dr. Ali, about the Palestinian voices that we're not hearing, the voices in the pro-Palestinian voices in the United States, as you know, have been silenced and even arrested, particularly on universities and such. So, I mean, that's just, despicable behavior. There's a question here. How much of the sentiment on the street in the global South is even getting through the political and media gatekeepers of those countries, which may be under we don't know, which may be under the control of the IMF or other US dominated institutions?
So I'm just rereading the question really quickly, make sure I understand it correctly. There are, I think the question is worded appropriately, the gatekeepers, right? There is so much gatekeeping, whether it be simple, at the local level, or nationally or internationally. The parties that be the media, particularly, which I hold accountable for aiding and abetting this genocide to unfold. This, as a child, when I grew up and I read about the Holocaust, in Europe, I could just never understand how could the world allow something like this to happen. Okay, sure, okay, that it's one individual, funded by a big military, but how is it that it happened? And it never made sense until I witnessed this current act of genocide. And it's simply that it's not just the fact that it's one person that is doing evil, one evil person that is in charge, but rather it's also because the people that do good remain silent, right? They choose to look the other way. So I certainly think that there are gatekeepers as well to the news, and as we know that a lot of information is taken as prima facie, and there's very little vetting that happens afterwards once a news article comes out. Once there's a report of Hamas beheading 40 babies, that's it. It doesn't matter if weeks down the line or months down the line, the Israeli forensic examiner admits to making up the information. admits to not witnessing any. It doesn't matter that President Biden says that he's seen the videos, even though there was no such video. Once the information is out there, unfortunately, we live in an age of social media in which there's very little fact checking.
Dr. Ali, I have a question for you. You're a pediatrician. I'm a OBGYN. And so much of what we do here in the United States for women before they leave the hospital after having a baby is to make sure they're going home feeling safe and well. We also are making sure that they have contraception, they have a plan for contraception, because we know, of course, it's a health risk to women to have multiple pregnancies in a short time. So did you get any sense of if any of that counseling even made sense in this context?
No, I think you bring up, thank you so much. I think you bring up a very important and salient points here. Some of it is certainly attributable. Obviously, there is something to be said about during an active war zone that potentially, being pregnant again would be challenging. Finding the resources would be challenging at that time. But even the most natural form of contraception, which, as you know, and we'll just share with the crowd here, is simply breastfeeding. Unfortunately, many of these mothers were either too stressed to produce breast milk, they were dehydrated, they were suffering various different degrees of starvation or trauma, or even, unfortunately, many of the mothers didn't survive the pregnancy. We had many patients that were extracted from their dead mothers. So for those that survived, for the mothers that survived, it was never-ending misery and devastation. I spoke to this one mother who told us that she was demanded displacement from the hospital in the north 30 minutes after delivering her child. Imagine, after delivering a child, she was, removed from the hospital, walking with this newborn baby through the rubble, dodging bullets from drones and bombs, and then living in a tent. I spoke to the mothers that were cutting up pieces of tarp from their tents to use as sanitation pads. In the case of twins and triplets, parents had to decide which child would survive on the ventilator because we didn't have enough, and which child would perish. Imagine having to make that decision as perhaps your first time mother, your first time parent, and you and your husband, if your husband is alive, um, you have to decide now that you have two children that require ICU needs, but there's not enough to cater to both of them. So now you have to decide which child is going to survive, And in many cases, if there was no family, then that burden was then transferred onto the healthcare staff. It was very very challenging for them, and trying to provide them with means of contraception is just impossible. Unfortunately, we were hoping to provide them with uh, some some form of, or false form of, at least security that they could survive this, when ultimately we knew that it's very likely that they wouldn't.
Dr. Ali, there was just this UN probe that came out yesterday or today about Israel's attacks on the reproductive health care in Gaza. I just put that in the chat. I would like to ask you a naive question, if I may. How can it be that doctors, physicians who take an oath of do no harm? You know my question. Can you answer me, please?
Yes, yes. Before I answer your question regarding the Reproductive Health Center and the frozen embryos, so I do know that the UN report came out recently, but I was actually informed about it, I think, pretty close to in real time when it had happened. And it was just absolutely devastating. That those are, I think it was 4,000 or 5,000 plus embryos. And not to say that every one of those children would have survived, but that's, thousands of hopes and dreams, both for the parents, but also for those children as well. I just cannot emphasize, and I just have to take a quick moment to talk about how pure and how beautiful the Gazan children are. You know, despite everything that's going on with them, if you ask them, and they just want to play, they just want to learn, they want to flourish. These mothers would, on the rubble walls, would teach their children their math lesson for the day, their Arabic lesson for the day. You know, Palestine has a 98% literacy rate. That is unbelievable and unheard of. You know, I was concerned when I went there, you know, how much Arabic would I need to know? To be honest, not that much. You know, I was surprised about the number of people that understood everything that I was saying. Sure, maybe only half could speak English back to me, but they very more often than not, they understood exactly what I was, you know, saying to them. So to see to hear about these embryos, and for what? Like what? You know, again, this is a naive question on my end, right? What threat do those embryos provide? Well, they are a threat, right? Because if they come to fruition, if those children are born, well, then they'll commit the same crime that every other Palestinian commits, that the Israeli army accuses them of, and that's simply existing. That is the biggest crime that any Palestinian can commit. Is their simple existence is a crime. So sorry, I'm so sorry, Miss Abby, but let me get back to your secondary question, which is how is it that other physicians can promote murder, torture, abuse? I didn't show a slide, but there is a slide signed by 100 Israeli physicians, including pediatricians just like myself. And they advocated, this is about 3 months after October 7th, they advocated for continued bombing of Gazan healthcare facilities and of civilians and restricting aid. And in fact, they said that there wasn't enough. And they also advocated for the imposition of collective punishment, stating that in no unequivocal terms that the people of Gaza have brought this upon themselves by voting Hamas into power. And I have that slide. If you give me a couple of minutes here, I can bring it up as well. It's signed by 100 Israeli physicians. And to see that just makes me sick to my stomach. Absolutely. I mean, this entire time, as a pediatrician, I've been advocating for child rights, child dignity, child health, and child education. But as a human being, do parents, do men and women not deserve to live? Right? I mean, the people that I interacted with are some of the best and wholesome individuals that I've ever come across in my short time working abroad in various different countries. Yet you have individuals, again, through dehumanization. I think it all comes down to dehumanization and occupation. These two arms go hand in hand, and they're allowing this genocide to continue, even amongst the healthcare, fortunately.
Yeah, thank you. Julie?
Yeah, Dr. Ali, it's after 8 o'clock. Do you have a few more minutes for?
I certainly do. Yes, yes. I'm
Okay.
free for at least a half an hour if you know if I'm given the opportunity to talk to answer.
Well, we do have more questions. I mean, someone is talking about how it's just absolutely heartbreaking, and wondering if you are in touch with the people who you worked with in Gaza, and what do you hear from them now?
Yeah, so I still am in contact with many individuals, not all of them, but many of the individuals that I work with. And unfortunately, about 30 to 40% of them have passed away. They were bombed in hospitals or in their homes, in their tents. Some were displaced. There was a small percentage earlier on, as soon as I left, I would say about 5% who were able to evacuate, that had the financial means to do so. But, you know, in their neighboring countries, but they've left their families behind. You know, not everyone is, you know, at that time it was 7,000 to 9,000 US dollars to try to evacuate out of Gaza. Mind you, this is before the Rafah crossing was bombed. right? I think the Rafah crossing, I went there in February. I think by April, the Rafah crossing was bombed last year. So until that point, some people were able to leave. And those that did, they did it out of desperation, leaving their families behind. And for the ones that are left back in Gaza, you know, uh, it's a very challenging life for them, as you can imagine. You know, some of them, I remember when I first went there, some of them would say to us, you know, Dr. Ali, we just pray that things went back to before October 7th. We'd be happy with that. And I would really reflect on that because I would take a moment and I would ask them, Suli, is that right? You would give anything to go back to pre-October 7th? Because what was that life like? You were still encaged in a prison, in an open air prison. You're unable to collect rainwater. Your children cannot have chocolate. Your women are not allowed to wear wedding dresses. You know, any semblance of joy was controlled. Their calories were restricted. And this is all pre-October 7th. So the circumstances are so dire now that to them, pre-October 7th seems like a dream.
Julie, maybe we take one more, but
Yeah.
can we respond to this? Cole, maybe you can help us out here. There's a comment from Carrie. So in fact, Hamas was properly elected by the people in Gaza. I don't know what year that was. Cole, do you know that?
I want to say 2006, and
Yeah. So they,
Tina also wrote the same in the chat. Yeah.
oh, who did?
Tina Liakopoulos.
I see. Yes, they were definitely elected. Yep. I don't see this. No, Carrie. They did not kill their opponents. They were elected into power. There was something here from Pat. I don't quite get the whole thing there, Pat. But how to open the hearts of people who are in denial. So Pat is asking, have you found any medical practices in the US where healthcare workers have opened their hearts, so to speak? I think to the Palestinian cause, who are not in cahoots with the line of the Israel lobby.
Yes, yes. On an individual level, there are many healthcare providers that I speak to. So I wear the same keffiyeh or the scarf that Dr. Jolin is wearing, and I wear that on a regular basis to work. And I wear it when I'm on rounds. I wear it, you know, right on top of my white gleaming lab coat, right, a physician's coat. And I wear it proudly, and I wear it as an opportunity to open up conversation. You know, as a pediatric intensive care doctor, I acknowledge the unique time at which I'm meeting my patients and their family members, right? So if a family member meets me and let's say they feel a certain negative way towards the Palestinian scarf, because of the fact that I'm taking care of their child, they probably will not display that towards me. They may think that I may treat their child differently, but rather I use that as a tool to open up a conversation. And I tell them that just like how I am devoted and committed and to take care of your child, and I want nothing but the best for your child, and I'm expecting for your child to heal 100%, anything less would be a failure on my end. I also want the same thing for the children in Palestine. I also want the same thing for the children in Israel as well. Right? Children deserve to grow up with respect and with dignity and to play and to learn. It's us adults who have just ruined the world for them. So on a personal level, I have seen many other healthcare providers who comment and tell me that, you know, it's so refreshing to see Palestinian support because ultimately Palestinian support is humanitarian support across the globe. And then on a organizational level, it, it really hurts me to say this out loud. I know of a large healthcare organization that is actively providing relief work for Palestinian children that are able to get evacuated out of Palestine and come to the US for treatment, burn treatment, rehabilitation, orthopedic, plastic reconstructive treatment. And I fear to say that name of that organization out loud because the amazing work that they're doing, I know in a heartbeat can get completely politicized, and that organization will no longer be allowed to function. They will no longer be able to provide that amazing work, and probably their own institution will go under as well. And I'm sure there are many individuals and organizations just like that. And what kind of world are we living in? Right? Truly, this is a stain on humanity. It's a stain on the healthcare system and our policymakers, in which taking care of sick children, individuals without limbs, taking care of them is considered to be anti-Semitic, is considered to be terrorist-like activity, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Dr. Ali, we thank you so much for the work you've done, the work you continue to do, and educating us all here today on what you've seen and learned from it. There is a comment in the chat that I really wanted to read, and it says, "The children of Gaza are the love of my heart and soul." And I see that that is how you feel. And it really means a lot to us to have you here today. So thank you very much. And if maybe, Cole, you could make the gallery view.
Well, all we have to do is remove the spotlight. So
Sure, yeah.
thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Don't go away because we want you to see people thanking you.
No problem, and thank you. And if I can just add on to that last comment that you read out, and it's a story that I like to share with everyone, and I think that it moved my heart, it touched my heart, and I'd like to share it with everyone here today as well. And that's that when I went to Gaza, the first child that I saw there in Rafah was a child named Kanan, and he was 10 years old. And he happened to be a healthy child. It was not a child that I was taking care of. He was just a child in the hospital. And I asked Kanan, what's your name? How old are you? He told me he was 10. And I told him that I have a 7-year-old son here back home in California. And imagine, Kanan, he's 10 years old, and he says to me, "Oh, doctor, may God protect your son." Right? That was his first response. Right? And he's saying this, and as he's saying that, there's bombing happening in the background. The hospital, windows are shattering. That you can hear the buzzing of the drones. And I was just completely taken aback because I had heard the Palestinians were special, but I wasn't expecting this coming from a 10-year-old, the first child that I met. So I was taken aback, and I went to go give him a hug. And as I was giving him a hug, he wasn't letting go, actually. He was holding on to me. So he looks up, I remember he looked up, into my, with his big brown eyes, he looks up at me and he goes, "Oh, doctor, if you don't mind, can you continue to hug me? And because you hug me just like my father does. And I haven't seen him in 4 months." And, my heart melted for him. My heart melted for Kanan. And there are countless stories just like that. But that comment that said that, the Gazan children are beautiful and at the heart, I mean, they are my heart, truly, as are all children of the world, as are all children of the world. So thank you once again. And I cannot thank everyone enough for your time, for your willingness to hear me try to advocate for these beautiful young children. Please forgive me if the honest truth is I don't have the vocabulary to try to describe how beautiful they are and how much of the world they truly deserve.
Thank you so much.
Yes, you have advocated for them. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to allow everyone to thank you, Dr. Ali. Cole, can we unmute? And all of you, if you could thank Dr. Ali in whatever way you want, verbally, put it in chat. Could you thank him for his enormous dedication to the Palestinian children and for his work overall?
Thank
you.
you.
So much, Ali.
Thank you, Dr. Ali.
Thank you so
May your
much.
heart be your
Thank
guiding
you.
key.
Thank you so much.
Much for living through your pain again, to share your stories with us
so that we understand and can share them with
Oh,
others.
look at that. Hello.
Namaste.
Thank you for your courage
May your
to
heart,
do what you
may
did
your
to
heart be your
represent
guiding
us.
key.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ali. Thank you.
May your heart